Okay, we're good to go. Let's get started. This is the Town of Nantucket Zoning Board of Appeals meeting November 7th, 2018. So let's start with the minutes of last time. I read them and had a couple questions, which I will get to. Well, number one, the members, now I can't find the darn page, but I think I left some pages. No, I didn't. Hold on. I'm looking at the wrong month. Hold on.
November 27th.
That's going to piss me off. Oh, well. Never mind. Yeah, can I have that, please? Sorry.
Is it that we have 4 listed as alternates? No, he's not
Yeah.
on there.
Thank you. All right, anyway. There was just a list of the members. Some of them were listed as voting and some as alternates. No, there's no distinction at this point, correct?
Right.
Okay, so well, that should just be changed. I don't think it needs to be listed. And then later on page 3 of 8, about halfway down the page, that's not it. Again, okay, there was a reference that I asked Mr. Newton. Well, no, there was a. Here it is. No, that's not it. I'm really sorry. I appear to have left my minutes at home.
Is it about the mitigation?
No, it was when there's a comment that I, quote unquote, confirmed something that Mr. Newton said, but then there's no reference to Mr. Newton, the hydrologist, about the confirmation. Oh, here it is. On page 2 of 8, second from the bottom, Toole confirmed that in Mr. Newton's opinion, there's no threat from this development to the water supply. I wasn't confirming that. I was simply asking Mr. Newton if that was what he had just said through his report. And I believe he responded, but there's no response here. So all I'd like to do is have someone check that and put the response in there. Because I wasn't stating a fact as much as asking Mr. Newton.
You want to table these to the next hearing?
Works for me. So anyway, can I get a motion to table the minutes till the next hearing?
Sure.
Lisa,
I'll make a motion.
Lisa makes the motion. Will someone second it?
Second.
Karen seconds. Any further discussion? No. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So the idea tonight is to start with traffic. Unfortunately, I believe both the Beta and the MDM consultants did not make it. Is that correct? So, Mike, do you want to sort of summarize the various memorandum? We'll start there.
Thank you. I'm Mike Burns, Transportation Planner for the Nantucket Planning Office. Mike Burns, Transportation Planner for the Planning Office. There really was a difference in the data that was collected at various times, and although there generally wasn't any disagreement that anything was collected incorrectly. It just that there were, because you collected on different days, that there were different values. There was a proportional impact that was agreed upon by the 3 different traffic engineers, and that's outlined in the memorandum that MDM had provided. There were a breakout of two scenarios, one being the 100 unit development, one the 156 development. So the proportional impacts to two intersections, the Fairgrounds, South Shore and Surfside Road, and the My Comment Road and Surfside Drive intersection. Those were the two intersections that were considered to be the critical intersections, and the under the 100 unit development scenario, the level of impact of the development was agreed upon to be 5.3%. And under the 156 unit development, agreed to be 8.2% for the South Shore and Surfside Road intersection, and then at the My Comment Road, Surfside Road intersection, under the 100 unit scenario, a 2.7% impact, and then a 4.2% impact under the 156 unit development. Basically, we use those ratios and assumed a high-level mitigation of correction for each intersection. And again, very, very conceptually, used a price to implement improvements in both of those intersections of $2 million. And applying this percentage to that, we get the figures that you have in your packet for the two different scenarios on 100 unit development and the 156 unit development. For the South Shore Road intersection, it effectively means that that there's sufficient funds generated by the impact to do initial design and conceptual and preliminary design for the South Shore Surfside intersection, and because there was a lower percentage for the My Comment Road intersection, effectively what could be done, because there's a high crash location at that intersection, there have been a number of crashes there, best planning practice is to initiate a roadway safety audit as the very first step to addressing an intersection with a high crash rate. There should be funds, again, using this proportion of 2% to the 2 million, sufficient funds to at least do a road safety audit and then have funding available to implement at least a portion of a mitigation that's recommended out of a roadway safety audit. That's included in the letter that's provided from the select board, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the material that you have in your packet. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you stay there for a minute, just in case there are any questions. Does anybody have any questions for Mike? I had a couple. So the bottom line is that through the teleconference, everybody came to an agreement, if you will, not necessarily on every detail of data collection, but that the end result, the I don't remember the exact numbers, 5.6 and 2.8 or
5.3 and 2.7, those,
yeah,
the proportionate numbers.
right.
Yeah.
Correct. During the counts that were collected in August by Beta, we used those counts collected by Beta in order to decipher what the proportional impact of the development was to the traffic at that intersection. Again, under a build scenario, going out 7 years and using a growth rate, that 5% was the proportional impact of the development on the entire intersection. So by applying that percentage to a, essentially reconstructing the intersection, we derived a figure of what could be a fair proportional mitigation of traffic at that intersection.
And is this normal operating procedure when traffic impacts?
We've used that strategy on a number of different developments. We used it for Richmond and some other developments, some of which don't get built. But it's best practices, and it's I think there's a concurrence from all the engineers that were involved in the project that this is very typical and what we consider to be a fair way of approaching mitigation of this development.
How does everybody feel about the mitigation idea?
Well, I had a question because sorry, it's not.
Probably not.
Hello? I was just curious because the article didn't pass to pursue the rotaries. So is there funding, even from the town's perspective, to deal with these two roundabouts that you referred to in the study?
Well, just to be clear, whatever was on the ballot, what was on the ballot a few weeks ago was dealing exclusively with Old South Road and Milestone Road. Didn't really address any type of projects within the vicinity of this project, the South Shore Fairgrounds intersection and the My Common intersection. I really couldn't use that as a gauge of whether that would be appropriate or not, just based on the ballot results.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
But just
Yeah,
to
I guess so.
answer your question even shorter, no, there's no public funds for either one of these intersections, if that answers your
So
question.
if there is added traffic because of certain developments, is the onus on the applicant to do the funding to create better traffic flow to deal with the traffic increase, or is that a town issue?
Each one of these
5%
are
doesn't sound like
handled.
very much, but in terms of the mitigation, it sounds really low.
The dollar amount or the
Yeah,
percentage amount?
The percentage amount. But
Again, we use this proportional mitigation as a way of approaching a discussion of what could be done by the applicant to mitigate their impacts to traffic. It's the approach that we adopted. We very rarely ask a development to rebuild a network of intersections because of impacts. It's you do it. You share the responsibility. If that's.
But is there a certain point where you just say that we can't do this anymore, just to let more development take place and just keep expanding the roadways?
I don't know if I follow the questions.
Well, I'm just questioning, do you always have to provide, do we always have to keep expanding our roadways and create rotaries and do the things that we need to do to allow large developments like this in Richmond and all those things take place? There's a point where we just say we don't want to have those kinds of developments anymore. I'm not suggesting that I'm saying that for myself, but I'm just
Sure.
asking the question of the planning department and the traffic studies.
That is a question that, that's, I don't have a fair answer for that, but I would just say that we do a study, we identify what intersections are stressed as a result of this intersection, and then we discuss what would be good mitigation to have the intersection function more efficiently, to bring level of service to a more appropriate level, from an F to, say, a C or higher, B or A. And that's all part of the discussion. Sometimes you can do a small fix to address issues. Adding a small section of sidewalk is sometimes all that needs to be done.
Right.
It really is a development by development way to review things and the scale of the development. So it's again, each one of these are very unique. I'm thinking of other projects where we've applied this to, say, a variety of 5 different intersections, and that particular development was part of their conditions was providing their proportional mitigation for all, I believe, 5 intersections that they would impact. This was a Mid-Island development. So it's just, I don't know if obligating an applicant to redo an entire network. It's all part of the discussion. And again, these things can be challenged once the decision is rendered by a board if the applicant feels it's unfair. But that's why we try to do this as fair and within the scope of best practices as we can. I mean, this is something that's a tool that's used in a number of different projects on island and in other communities in the Commonwealth.
All right, so we don't have to accept the mitigation. We could say it's more or less, or nothing at all, or they have to do everything.
Right.
But as Mike said, I mean, that would probably be challenged.
Yeah, I agree.
Mike, I know we got away from level of service and whatnot in the final memorandum, but does this development specifically render the 2 intersections in question from LOSC to F kind of thing, or were they already F and now they're just F worse or F plus, or do you know the answer to that?
Obviously, Beta, who's not here, knows these answers a heck of a lot better than I do, but my familiarity with it was that it was very close. I believe the level of service was an E at the worst condition, and it really took like maybe 2 more vehicles to delay it into an F condition. Again, we're using time as the scale here, and adding 2 more seconds of delay is not all that significant, but it is enough to go from a level service E to an F, which is what the case was here. And again, the 3 engineers just stopped really debating those conditions and focused on what we could agree on, and that was their impact to the intersections at the peak count that was collected.
Just out of curiosity, are many of the intersections on Nantucket in that range on peak day?
Level service?
Yeah, level of service E, F.
In the Mid-Island area, absolutely. Yeah, and especially in town, yeah, in the busier areas. And if you're waiting more than a minute or two, you can rest assured that you're probably at a level service F intersection because that's the scale.
And what does that mean when you're in line from the time you get in line to through the intersection? Over a minute would be F.
Correct.
Roughly.
If I'm driving to 5 corners from Surfside Beach, or 4 corners by the high school from Surfside Beach, and I'm on Surfside Road, and I drive up, and all of a sudden I enter the queue, I'm stopped in a line of cars. That's when you would start the clock. And for anybody who drives around in the summer, you know that if you're backed up around this high school driveway or first way, you're probably going to be in that line for about 5 minutes. It takes about somewhere between 4 or 5 minutes to process through and get through that intersection. So that's a very bad F because the threshold is a minute to go into level service F.
There's nothing beyond F, right? You're either F or F.
Super F, a very obnoxious F, yes.
Right. Obnoxious F. Okay. Thank you.
I was just going to follow up on that.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Matt. Just to follow up with Lisa's question, if it were determined that there would need to be major improvements to these intersections, I know the funding gets complicated even though we have the percentages down. You could determine that we need a roundabout or something, but then at town meeting, like what happened this year, it could be voted down, so the improvements don't get made even though there's an impact. Is that right? I mean, this could...
No, you're absolutely right. And just to be clear, the Beta and I believe the select board also endorsed the recommendation for a roundabout at this intersection, not only because the traffic was yielded a level of service E or an F to where it was pretty, if it wasn't at failure, it was close to failure. But there's 4 very heavily used crosswalks at the intersection. There was a very busy bus stop and 2 bike paths going through the area. And it's a very, very busy, and to have a safer crossing, a roundabout does provide that. There's some debate in the community, but best practice is a roundabout does reduce conflicts, reduces speeds, and that ultimately was the recommendation that came out from Beta when they looked at this and other intersections. Again, we don't really have a configuration recommended for the My Comet Road and Surfside Road intersection. That needs to be studied a little bit further because maybe a roundabout isn't necessary there, but it should be evaluated because the crash rate is very high.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is would it be possible, and this, you might not be able to answer this, but if you determine that there would need to be some level of improvements, could we go about it without going through town meeting so that everybody can pay their portion? Or would we still be subject to the town not approving it, the voters?
Correct, and that's a bigger question than I can answer. If it's a project that can be absorbed within the existing town budget, which is very unlikely, it doesn't need to go to a ballot. A lot of times these things, because they can't be fit within the town's budget, they need an override, it goes to a ballot. If there was money donated, funds that all of a sudden essentially paid for the intersection's construction, we don't need to go to ballot. So there's a number of different scenarios we can do through donations, through gifts, low cost improvements that just don't need to go to a ballot. But once you get to the magnitude of about $2 million, it's fairly certain that it probably will.
Thank you. Anybody else? So how do we feel about traffic then as a board? Obviously, the 2 consultants didn't make it. I'm not 100% sure that they need to make it next time, unless we want to get into the minutia. Or we can table that discussion and decide later on whether we want to hear from them. How does everybody feel about it? help.
I don't feel that the traffic warrants,
Talk into the mic, please.
I don't think we need to get the traffic consultants back here personally. I don't feel we need to get the traffic
It's probably not on.
consultants back here.
Is your on-off on yours?
Does that work?
Pick it up like a rock star. There it goes.
Didn't they say in one of the emails?
I don't think we need to get the traffic consultants back down.
Okay. Thank you. How does everyone else feel?
I agree. I mean, I think.
Talk it in the mic, please. Everybody's channel.
I agree.
Okay.
I think we have enough information.
Okay. Susan?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with the methodology or anything like that. It's based on national standards and calculations, and I think it's hard to say that it's some other different number than what they've come up with. So my concern is, if there are improvements, are we going to have to rely on a town meeting and a ballot and possibly not get the improvements made? And we have a difficult situation there. So that's my concern.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we're, again, foreclosing any further discussion about the impact that this development has on traffic and how we might condition the whole thing. But I think for now, I don't know that we need to get into the minutia. Go ahead, Ed.
Ed Marchand, Chapter 40B advisor to the ZBA in the town. I'd just like to share some of my experiences with other 40B projects. And the process has been very similar to this in terms of the applicant submitting a traffic report, then having a peer review. This is extraordinary in terms of having your own traffic engineer. We don't necessarily call it proportional mitigation. We called it fair share. It's exactly the same thing. And the reason towns wanted the applicant to make funding was to prepare a PS&E plan specifications and an estimate. That's done so that it can be submitted to MassDOT, because you never know when there might be funding available under PWED or some of the other state funding programs. And what they want and what they need is sort of plans that are completed, so that when they fund it, it can get into action. And I think, as I read the report, it said that the funding, the fair share contribution, would be used for exactly that, to prepare plans. So I think that's the real benefit, because these improvements are expensive, and almost all communities try to get state assistance on infrastructure improvements such as these.
Typically, Ed, in your experience, is traffic or this amount of impact five? Well, I'm focusing on the 100 unit, not the 156. What was it?
5.3?
5.3 and 2.8,
2.7.
2.7. Is that a big impact? How would you rank that? Is that possible too?
The project I worked on by chance happened to be in the 6 or 7% range in terms of, because with 40B, and again, this is a 40B project, and there are extra constraints in terms of reviewing a 40B project. If there's an existing issue in town, the 40B developer is not expected to cure that itself. It's expected you can ask for a fair share contribution. But the HAC, if you told a developer that they had to fund 100% of the improvements, the HAC would say, no, that's an existing problem. The developer didn't create that problem. It's going to exacerbate the problem. But the solution is to make a proportional mitigation contribution.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on the board before I go to the public on traffic? What did Susan say? So Susan didn't think the consultants had to come back
Yeah, I
either.
disagreed with Lisa. Yeah, sorry.
All right, to the public, about traffic only, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Go.
David Iverson, Falcon Drive. I disagree respectfully with the board. I would like to see the traffic study guys back. Of just a few things, and you guys talked about the mitigation. The beta report reflects that upon the finishing of this build, both South Shore Fairgrounds Road will be at an LOS of F, but also will the Sparks Avenue intersection with Fairgrounds be at an OLS F because of this. So yes, the intersections between there are already at an F. So I'm not sure why we're having them pay to mitigate ones that are already at an F when they should be mitigating the bigger ones that are a bigger problem. I also think that all of the reports really minimize the effect of the neighborhood on South Shore Road. You know, they all say 7%. I know how they get there. But the reality of it is that they're increasing the traffic in our neighborhood by over 50%. Okay? So the additional 1,300 trips a day, give or take, that both of the reports specify, all originate and end in our neighborhood. Okay? So it's not 7% to us. It's 50+%, which will significantly affect everyone in that neighborhood. So to say that it's 7% and walk away, I think is very unfair to the people that live in that neighborhood and raise their families in that neighborhood. I also think that the 1% that they add yearly for growth is unreasonable here. I don't know anyone that can say we grow 1% a year. Do you think our traffic issues only compound 1% a year? Anyone that drives around here? I don't think they can say that. And so I think that maybe that is the metric they use for Cape Cod, but I don't think that's a fair metric to hear. The beta study has 8 surrounding intersections at an LOS of F in 5 years without even a build here. So I think, again, to minimize this 7% and to say they have to just pay a few dollars on something that probably won't get built because the town will turn it down is silly. And I think that the board should say that if they want to build this project, then they can't build it until the traffic mitigation piece starts or is completed.
Just to clarify, Dave, are you saying, in your opinion, you would like to see a condition which said you cannot put a shovel in the ground until, let's say a roundabout was called for, until it was built or until the study was done?
Until it was built. I mean, we've done, how many traffic studies have been done? I mean, it seems, clearly there's an issue here with traffic if so many studies have been done and MDM has come back with so many responses to the numbers that they don't like. And there's a lot of good questions to them. I mean, what is it that how many more cars to create an F here? And why are we focusing on the whole intersection and not at all talking about the people that are affected the most on what side of that intersection? I mean, a 54% increase in your neighborhood of traffic is staggering. It really is. I mean, think about any of you guys where you live. 54% more cars in your neighborhood. I mean, that's a scary thought. And to minimize it and to say they have to pay a couple $100,000 and everything's all right, it just doesn't seem right to me. I have so many questions, but again, it's not fair to stick Mike on the hot seat over them. Again, in the study, there was no discussion. I mean, they touched on it, but there was no discussion about what happens when Lover's Lane's paved and all that 400+ bedroom, half of that traffic, because nobody wants to go down Old South Road anymore, comes funneling down Oak Raw to the boulevard, straight down to that same old stop sign. So I think that there's a lot of things in these reports that need to be carefully looked at before we don't invite the experts back and we just nod at the minimal amount of money they have to pay for some roundabouts that may not even get built. That's about it for me.
Well, do you think getting the expert back changes any of this? I mean, you brought up all
Ed, I
these
don't
points,
think-
which
I
are
don't
good
know. I mean,
points, and I appreciate it. I don't know that
Maybe
having the expert here to grill is going to change it. The traffic is bad.
and maybe not. Maybe then I just urge you guys to really read the reports and take a closer look at it.
Because they base all of their figures on professional data as opposed
You know,
to,
their
so it-
all-day trips and their peak AM and PMs
Right.
are not that far apart. I think they're all low. My personal opinion, I'm not a traffic expert. But it's the way they apply it that minimizes the impact on the neighborhood.
right.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, they don't specifically talk about the neighborhood, period, do they?
No, they don't. They don't talk about it at all. They do, well, I take that back. They do talk about how the trips are distributed out of the parking lots for the neighborhood, but they don't talk about the specific percentage of increase in traffic in the neighborhood anywhere in any of the studies. And I just don't think that's fair.
Is your 54% increase number,
No.
is that related
Okay.
to the 156 unit or the 100 unit?
The 100, I believe, so here's the deal, that 3,100 daily trips, okay? My number's 54, their number is different. Let me, so their number, MDM says it's gonna be a 41% increase. They're saying it's gonna add 1,272 daily trips. Beta's is 1352, and that adds 43. My numbers, and again, I'm not a traffic guy, but you know, we have 526 bedrooms on South Shore Road. These guys are going to increase that number by 54%, okay? By the additional 285 bedrooms. And so if you take 54%, that 3,100 trips is driven by the 526 bedrooms we have on our road right now.
Okay.
You add
I got it.
54% more, we're
I
going to
got
have
it.
54% more traffic, and it's just common sense.
Okay,
All right,
just one.
thank you.
Thank you.
Herschel Allerhan, 47 Union Street. This question might be best answered by the gentleman who had experience before. Under 40B, as I understand it, the town is on the hook to spend the money to make reasonable improvements, whether we like it or not. Can this gentleman talk about his experiences? Because when you say that we have to do mitigation, if there's a problem here in the first place and they didn't cause it, then we are maybe under the gun to pay for these improvements, whether the town approves it or not.
Again, Ed Marchand. My experience has not been that the town is forced to fund those improvements. The argument the applicant made, however, this was a fairly substantial town with good resources. The applicant said politely, if it's such a great problem, why didn't you do something about it before? And I think there's some rationale to that. But the developer said, look, we're willing to pay our fair share. But there was no requirement. The project has subsequently been built. The improvements haven't been completed yet.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Mary Beth Splain, 11 South Shore Road, direct abutter. We have a lot of issues as direct abutters, but there's one issue that I'd like to speak to in the neighborhood. And that is that both the traffic reports have looked north of the project and looked at the intersection. Now we're talking about mitigation, blah, blah, blah. Do you know that in California, the huge, devastating wildfires that happened the last couple of weeks, with 85 dead and over 200 missing. The headlines this week were poor planning with dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs led to gridlock in case of emergency, and people could not get out of their neighborhoods, had to resort to walking while their cars burned up. South Shore Road is a 1-mile-long dead-end street running from the water and the sewer beds up to Surfside Road. Feeding into that are 7 or 8 dead-end streets, which feed into South Shore Road, which feed into Surfside Road. In the case of an emergency, whether it's the big hurricane that we've been able to dodge so far, or it's a fire, or it's a flood, or whatever it is, we won't be interested in how many cars are at the Rotary because we'll never get to the Rotary. We'll be down at Folger Avenue because South Shore Crossing is strangling the access out of our neighborhood onto Surfside Road. You can build all the roundabouts you want, but that is not going to mitigate what it means to us in the neighborhood. Don't be fooled by this bucolic picture of what looks like a sweet suburb in Connecticut. It is not Surfside Crossing. It's South Shore strangling.
Thank you. Right.
I just want to sharpen some of the things that Mike Burns said. He said that the roundabouts were about 2 million each. In the selectman's letter, it's 2.4 million each, or for a total of 4.8 million. And the mitigation for a 100 unit was 132,000 for one roundabout and 67,000 for the other roundabout, for a total of 199,200 as the proposed mitigation against the 4.8 million. For the larger project, the price is still 4.8 million. This is from the Selectman's letter on page 158 of your packet. And the proposed mitigation for the 156 unit project totals for a 4.8 million expenditure, $312,000. And the final point I'd make is that with the intersections already at pretty much a LOS level of F, essentially the existing infrastructure can't handle this project unless these improvements are made. So these improvements should be made before a project like this is permitted.
Thank you. Okay. One more.
Thank you. Jacques Simigi, a butter. I've got a question for Mike, and you might not be able to answer it. Currently at peak morning traffic hours, they have 148 cars as exiting South Shore Road. And I'm just wondering if there is a number, if you could put a number on how many more cars, the 100 unit Surfside Crossing or 156 will be going off of South Shore at peak hour. I mean, is it just 2.5%? So it's basically 4 cars or 3 cars, or?
Well, just to be clear, the 2% that you're referring to is the impact on the My Comet Road intersection. Traffic from this development that would go through the My Comet Road intersection. So that's, to be extremely clear, that's what that 2% is referring to. It's not 2% of the traffic from the development.
So I'm just wondering, from the practical standpoint, that 148 at peak hour, 148 cars going down South Shore Road, going through that intersection. And if this gets built at peak hour, how many cars are going to be going? What's the projected number of cars going through that intersection from?
The 100-unit development for the South Shore Road, Fairgrounds Road intersection, for the 100-unit development, it was 60 vehicles on that approach going into an intersection with 1,140 trips going through the intersection. Under the 156-unit development, it was 93 vehicles going through that same intersection that already processes during peak hour 1,140 vehicles.
Okay, great.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Let's just focus on the 100, because I don't think we need to talk about the 156 anymore.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Because I don't, let's put it this way. I don't think I'm voting for the 156 unit. So why don't we try to get to a place that maybe we can either vote to approve this with conditions or deny it. Now, again, if we just talk about the 156, maybe we get there. But I think the applicant now has the 100 on the table. That's what we're discussing. I'm just trying to, again, if the applicant comes in tomorrow or next month and says, we want to go back to the 156, we'll talk about it. But we're discussing the 100 now, just in the interest of moving forward. Go ahead.
Okay, a follow-up. So basically on South Shore Road, we counted 400 cars there. So let's round up 500, just say we were off a little bit. So we have 500 cars that are used off of South Shore Road. This would be projected to be another 200 cars, 300 cars coming out of this. And so I'm just trying to put the numbers with the number of cars that we have on South Shore Road, the number of cars this is going to do in the number of, and it just doesn't seem like the numbers are adding up. That's all.
Mr. Chairman, it seems like I don't know where these numbers are coming from that I'm being asked to provide answers to. I don't know what 500 vehicles on South Shore Road is. What we looked at was peak hour in the morning and peak hour in the evening. And this development contributed, again, 5.5% of traffic in the peak hour to the traffic that's already being processed through that intersection. And I think I'd like to leave my answers there. And I don't want to change the spectrum of the window of time or the volumes.
Well, actually, I believe I wasn't changing the spectrum of time. I was changing the metric in that we're trying to approach it by saying how many cars actually live on South Shore Road, and you're asking us to believe that if we increase that, if we double that number, or maybe do 80% of that number, that we're only going to have 60 more cars. I'm just trying to put practical rather than using a metric
Right.
maybe that came from North Dakota, South Dakota, wherever. And you might not have an answer, but I'm just wondering, because I'm just thinking of practicality.
Well, I think your point is that how many parking spaces are in here? 160 something parking spaces? I can't remember. So if every one of those cars is, how do you add only 60 trips?
In the morning, it was estimated that 60 trips, again, just based on the 100 development, 60 trips in the morning at the Surfside South Shore Road intersection. 33 of those would go through the My Comet Road intersection. In the evening peak hour, 77 vehicles would go through the South Shore Fairgrounds Road intersection. 42 of those would have passed through the My Comet Road intersection. So we're in this range of less than 100 vehicles. And again, it's at peak hour. It's not throughout the course of the day kind of a thing. It's just in that peak hour how stressed will the intersection be as a result of this development.
Can we stipulate that the traffic is going to be worse?
Well, yeah, it's going to be much worse, I think. And then one follow-up question with Mr. Burns that hopefully you can answer. When the traffic studies like this get done, has town ever gone back and actually done another traffic study to see if what they were basing their approval on turned out to be true?
Mr. Chairman, I'm being asked if there's ever been follow-up traffic studies done, not for a particular development, but for areas.
Okay.
A lot of these counts were updated from the Mid-Island traffic study that was done a number of years ago. A number of different intersection improvements were based off a Mid-Island traffic study that was done 10 years ago. But we do try to update these things, the intersection counts periodically, and then we go back and reference historically what were those numbers in order that we can communicate to you all what traffic growth has been like annually. And that's really where we get our 1% traffic growth, is by looking at again, there's lots of developments, lots of MCDs, lots of traffic counts have been done in this community, a lot of traffic studies. Looking at the array of them, the math shows that it's roughly about 1% traffic growth in the area. So yes, we do do some diligence and looking back through historic data.
Well, but actually, what I'm asking is a specific instance that you've had a development happen and you've gone back, or you've happened to do that intersection, that, let's say this one, if this happened years ago and you came back and studied Surfside intersection again a year later, just because that's what the town does, is collects data. Mm-hmm. Does that data line up with what is projected here now, or what has been projected for other developments in the past?
Mr. Chairman, we've used a very ambitious growth rate in the studies in the past, something between 2.5% and 4.5% growth rates. And the community just hasn't experienced that level of growth rate, so we've brought it back down to what we have experienced, 1%.
Okay. I'm satisfied
Thank you.
with the answer. You have something on traffic? You have to come to the mic, identify yourself, please.
Can I ask a question?
Hold on.
Mindy Levin, 10 Folger Avenue. Did I understand that, so from 100 houses, there will be 60 cars at the intersection at peak hours?
No.
No, 90, split between two intersections.
90, oh, okay, I thought it was 60.
Is that what you said? 60?
60, yes.
Oh,
So
60
out of
total.
100 houses, 60 cars will be traveling. What are peak hours? What does that mean? Not like 7 to 9 in the morning?
What? It's 244 parking spaces.
Go ahead, Mike. Thank you.
Sure. Traffic counts, we're taking over a 2-hour time frame in the morning from 7 a.m. till 9 a.m. and then in the evening from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock. We averaged those out over and basically took the high number. So that's where we get what we think would be the high number of peak hour in that 2-hour window of time. For over an hour, what would be the high number going through that intersection? Again, 60 from the development in the morning and then 77 in the evening. In the peak, again, it's recognizing that some people don't travel to work in that peak hour. Call it 7 to 8 o'clock. Some people may go to work at 9 outside of that peak hour. So it's a number that changes throughout the course of the day. But this is again peak hour. Look at a 2-hour window in the morning and the evening, and then average it out and pick the high number.
And these numbers were derived from counts or just industry practice in terms of this number of people in the development, this number of people leave then?
The trip generations derive from looking at communities all over the country. And it assumes, again, Mr. Chairman, it's really important to note this, that nobody's really walking or biking or taking the bus. It's that they're all driving. These are all very auto-dependent, so they're meant to be conservative.
Thank you.
So if peak hours are 7 to 9 and 100 houses will only put 60 cars out, I'm wondering by show of hands, how many people in here leave their house between 7 and 9?
Hands. We're not getting into the theatrics here.
But
If you
I
have a
don't-
question, Mike, just ask the question.
Well, it doesn't seem like a reasonable number to think that only 60 cars are going to leave their house between 7 and 9 o'clock from 100 houses.
That's a fair statement.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, Mike, how are the numbers? Just give us one more explanation. How are the numbers derived? And then we're going to have to move off traffic relatively soon.
Sure. The trip generations, the counts are the counts. We collect those in the field.
Right.
The traffic generated from this development is based on surveys done by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. It's in, AASHTO documents, it's national standards, so that everybody's on a level playing field. So this is from, an ITE manual, Institute of Transportation Engineers.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Brooke Willow Gibbs up from the island. Mike, sorry to put you on the spot again. I think your numbers are off, and they're pretty bad because you're taking a national approach to a very specific intersection, and you're not. I didn't see any directional impact from each direction that the traffic is coming from at that intersection. For South Shore, I mean, I'm sure they're going to get 40-50% increase, from just that one part. And considering all the bike traffic that comes across that side of the street and people that don't stop at that intersection, if you put a rotary in there, it's going to be just like at Milestone, and nobody's going to know when to stop. People are going to have blind right turns and be running over people left and right. And if you double the number of people coming just from that one direction, how much worse is it going to get? On top of that, $2 million for doing the roundabout is really low because you're going to have to probably redo a lot of infrastructure under the intersection. Sewer mains, water mains, fiber optic, gas. I mean, you guys don't have gas for town, but there's a lot more impact than just $2 million for doing that roundabout at that intersection.
Thank you.
Okay.
Was there? Yeah.
I don't think there was a question.
I just again, Dave Iverson. Again, we're like saying, okay, there's going to be 60 more cars. But we're not looking at the whole picture, and we're minimizing this. In the AM peak, there's already 292 cars, Beta says, at that intersection at peak. So we're adding another 60. That's a considerable amount. And in the evening, there's a 252 at PM peak. And so we're adding that 70 to that. So again, just talking about what they're going to generate is really minimizing the issue here. We need to look at the whole picture, and we also need to look at the impact at South Shore specifically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, if I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cormac Collier from the Nantucket Land Council. Although I don't necessarily agree with this very weak proportional impact number that they're coming up with, in terms of what Mr. Drensis and others have said, I totally agree. It is completely within your jurisdiction to make sure that these improvements get done before development happens. Planning Board does it on a consistent basis in terms of requiring certain improvements before lots are released. They have a Form J lot release process. I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with it, that they do and require that certain conditions are met for infrastructure improvements before lots are released, and you can do it as such going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. How does the board feel about moving on from traffic at this point? Again, not saying we'll never discuss traffic again. I think we need to continue to make progress. Okay. Now, I apologize, but Ms. Coombs wanted to say something, and I frankly forgot. Yeah.
I'm here to try and get something straightened out that I mentioned, I think at the first big meeting here, about the HDC. This application has never come before the HDC to study, approve, or send it back. It was one afternoon meeting, our Thursday meeting, under other business back in May. We had a quick discussion because a letter had to be sent to the ZBA. They asked for HDC conservation planning. They asked for our feeling and what we thought of it. So we gave a very brief letter that described what questions we had that was sent by the chairman, Ray Pohl. But it has never come before us. We did see on that Thursday afternoon very quickly the original drawings from Matt McEachern and he has retired as architect for that meeting, for the place, and it is now Chris Dalmas. We have never seen these. It has not been approved. If the 40B feels that it has been, I would like to see the minutes of that meeting, or the 3 meetings that it was approved at, because I have been in touch with John Hedden, who is our administrator. We went over it again today, and it has not been approved in any way, shape, or form by the
And thank you. We're aware that it hasn't gone to the HDC yet, and the applicant is asking that we act as the HDC. So we are going to ask the HDC for more input, but we haven't gotten there yet.
No, but it has been implied that it has come before us 3 times, and it has not.
No.
The other thing, I just want to make a suggestion of a question in the traffic business. If Mr. Posner's application is not approved at the reduced number and the rotary and all this stuff, his original application is still good in front of the board, right?
The applicant has many avenues open to them. Ultimately, they're allowed to appeal any decision if they're not happy.
Right,
So-
but the old application is still on the board, is it?
We are currently discussing a modified plan.
Yeah, I know that. I just wanted to know if.
At the state level, that's the only plan they
At the state level, then, that's the only plan they got, right?
The state, again, I'm gonna let Ed or George take this, but I will say the state has done what they've done at this point, and then ultimately it will go back to the state in some fashion, depending on what happens here, if and when we maybe get to a point where we're able to take a vote. So we're not there. George, would you like to add to that?
I don't have much to add to it. It's a little pessimistic. I mean, the goal of this is to, reach a project that everybody's happy with, that will get conditioned, and the abutters and opponents will be happy with the conditions. The developer will be happy with the conditions. Everybody's there with a good 40B project that everybody's happy with. In the event somebody's not happy, it's true. The full unit number project is still technically on the table, and typically what happens is a developer can use that as leverage over you. Say they engage in some type of negotiating process with you, which is coming out of these hearings, and they end up not happy with the result. They can go back and revert to that, to the larger project if they're back before with a hearing, an appeal hearing with the Housing Appeals Committee. But again, I was facetious a little bit about being too pessimistic, but there's by no means any compelling reason why this has to end up back at the Housing Appeals Committee. So there's no reason for that issue really to ever come up again. But it is something that they can use as leverage down the line to return to that project before the HAC if they're unhappy with your decision. And one other thing I'd note, though, and you're acting in accordance with what our recommendation would be, is to keep talking about the modified plan. That makes sense. The developer has presented a modified plan to you in good faith. It would be good to start to focus attention on that plan, start to work on that plan. And one thing I'd note, I noted something about leverage that the developer has to revert to that higher unit plan. But you also have leverage, because once they admit to a 100-unit project, they're essentially admitting to you that that's an economic project for them. So, there's always so much that can be hidden, on both sides. So yes, technically they can revert to that higher end project, but it does make a lot of sense for you to start focusing your efforts in these hearings on this modified plan and seeing what can be done with that plan.
Thank you. Okay, so having said that, why doesn't the applicant, do you have anything new to present? You do, correct? Will you please present it? If nothing else, do you have anything?
Mr. Chairman, Josh Posner for Surfside Crossing. I had thought that we would move into a discussion of the housing program and the architecture. There are a few pieces of that we would be happy to include in that discussion. There are plans that have been submitted to you now for the recreation building. So I don't know that there's a need for a separate presentation.
Okay, why don't I just cut to the chase? I don't think we need to talk about the specific architectural details quite yet. Does the board agree with that? I don't think we're there. I would like to talk about your plan as it relates to the year-round component, because clearly you're still sticking to the condos as an integral part of your plan. Is that correct? And therefore, the quid pro quo in some ways is the condo units. So if you want to give us I frankly don't want you to read it, but can you give us the broad brushstrokes on how that's going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to do that. So the potential modified plan is 100 units. It consists of 40 single-family cottages and a series of condominiums in 5 different buildings totaling 60 units. Under 40B, as you know, 25% of all of the units are restricted at a price. These are for sale. This is for sale housing. The prices are set by a formula that results in a price that's affordable to households that earn 80% of the area median income. So of the 125 units are reserved that way. Of the 60 condominium units that make up a portion of that 100, 15 are restricted under the 40B program. That leaves 45 additional condominium units. Our proposal is that all of those 45 condominium units be restricted to year-round island residents. And we have said that for a while, but we've spent a considerable amount of time over the last few months working out the details of a very specific program that we've submitted to you that defines exactly how that would work. In essence, of those 45 non-40B condominium units, our proposal is that 30 of those be restricted at the outset to year-round residents who can demonstrate that they are year-round residents. If there are more than 30 of them that are interested in buying the units, that there would be a lottery process similar to what happens under the other affordable units. That there would be a deed restriction in the units, in those units, that would require that residents for the first 30 years, which is our understanding of the legally allowed maximum for such a deed restriction, that would require the original buyer to resell to another year-round person who is qualified, and that those units would not be allowed to be rented out by the week in the summertime, for example. They would need to be the primary residence for that year-round owner. And all of that would get worked into a deed restriction that would be enforceable through the monitoring agent for the project. And we think that that's a program that will make a big difference and create a significant amount of housing that would be useful to year-round, middle-income people who are priced out of the normal market. and would be able to get a home at Surfside Crossing. So that's what 30 of the units, how 30 of the units would work. We would have an additional up to 15 units that would be reserved for purchase by Nantucket nonprofit organizations, 501c3s. And they would be able to use those units for their permanent employees, for their year-round employees, not for seasonal staff, but that would also be a big advantage, not only for the people who work for those nonprofits in terms of having a stable and good place to live, but it would be good for the nonprofits themselves and their own recruitment and retention of their key employees. So that's the idea with restricting the condominium units for year-round residents. There are a lot of details that we have included in these 2 or 3 pages, and we would then, once we've got an agreement on the basic program, this would then get converted into legally binding documents as a condition of the permit, would be how we see it.
I have a couple questions for you. On the not the not-for-profit ones, but on the other one, you specifically said this would give the opportunity for year-rounders in the middle income range to be able to purchase a home, if you will. And are there income restrictions?
There wouldn't be an income restriction in this, the way it's structured now. We are setting the price at what we think is a rate that is affordable to that middle income household. And then the resale would be restricted to other year-round islanders. And so from that perspective, it creates its own little sub-market within the housing market, which we think would keep the pricing affordable over the longer term.
Well, what would preclude me, for instance, from buying if I wanted to downsize and I wanted to buy a 3-bedroom and I don't necessarily fit the what you were describing? I mean, it seems without some sort of income restriction, all 30 of those could be sold to. And I'm not saying one group is better or worse than the other, but somebody who might only be here for 7 or 8 months, but leaves for 4 to 5 months. Not that I'm lucky enough to do that yet, but so without the income restriction, it doesn't seem to be fitting.
I don't know that the income restriction would necessarily. I think that the restriction that makes it your primary residence keeps it from being something that you only can use part-time. At least
Well, six months in a day is a primary residence, correct?
Yes.
I mean, again, I'm not in that world yet, but I believe that makes it a primary residence.
Well, it depends on how you define it. The land bank, if you are the first-time home buyer, right, and you get that exemption, there's some specific things that they do to check to make sure that within that, first year that lien is on, that you're actually living there, and it is your primary residence. So I think you need to spell it out a lot more clearly about what your applicants or your population is going to be, and also for financing, because it would seem to me, and I hadn't really thought about Ed's scenario there, but if you have people who want to downsize or want to sell their property and then buy in here, they may have much easier access to financing and be able to pay a higher price. And even if it is capped, it seems to me that you would some kind of income verification or something so that you actually are servicing the teachers, police officers, nurses, people that you say that is the audience that you want to, or the population that you want to help.
Yeah, by the way, I'm not talking about income restrictions at 100% of AMI, 200% even. 200%, I don't know what the number is, but it's fairly large. I think it's over $200,000 a year.
Right, like I guess because I hadn't thought about that, because what I think what Ed is saying, you don't want it, your target population is not retirees looking to downsize, although this may be a very good option for them. How are you going to ensure? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have access to this property, but from the beginning, you've said that you want this to be for working families and like essential personnel for our town to keep us going.
Anyway, yeah.
I don't know if that's legally enforceable.
We had thought that this would not preclude people who were downsizing from buying into this location. But this is exactly the kind of conversation that we want to have with you in terms of what the program should be and what the policy should be in terms of the details. And we're not coming at this necessarily from the standpoint of this is it and there's no flexibility. There are some difficulties with the whole income program, I think, as a practical matter. Once you get up into the 200 to 250% of AMI and a $750,000 condominium, in terms of what restrictions are in place for that buyer and what they are willing to accept as restrictions in terms of their own ability to sell in the future, and the bureaucracy involved, and the as well as some of the concerns that we would have as developers in terms of knowing what we're going to be able to sell those units for at the outset. And so there's some real challenges as we looked at the inclusion of a high-level AMI as an income restriction for the program. And so we've proposed it this way as a result of that.
And I appreciate that. And if that's your model, that's your model. I'm not saying that this model is unworkable. What I'm saying is you specifically said these are out there to fill a need in that market where a young family or whatever needed that housing and was going to fit in there. But so if you're not specifically building for that market, don't say you are. Is all I'm saying. Which is fine. I just want it to be very transparent what's going on, and there's nothing to preclude anybody from buying one of these units.
Jamie wants to chime in here, and he will in just a second. But our thinking is that the pricing that we've proposed as the original pricing, which is written down, it's in here. We've committed that we won't vary that beyond a limited amount, and we think that this program will mean that if you bought one of those units and you are restricted in terms of who you can sell it to, in terms of another year-round person, you're not going to be able to sell it to a summer person who wants to rent it out by the week. You're not going to be able to sell it to an investor who is, just renting the unit. And so that will restrict the value of that unit in a way that is reasonable and that will result in a level of affordability for a middle-income buyer down the road. And so that's the concept. And so it is different from an income-restricted regulatory approach. But I think that it does meet not just in the first round, which we're committing to in terms of the pricing, but on an ongoing basis over that 30-year restriction. We believe that that'll work and maybe something that's of value more broadly in Nantucket as we try and address this affordable housing problem more broadly. Part of the idea, by the way, and Jamie is going to have a chance in just a second, but we reached out to other people who are active in the affordable housing field in Nantucket. Tucker Holland, Brooke Moore, Jason Bridges, and Linda Holland have worked with us to talk about, Linda Williams. I'm sorry, Linda Williams, right. Got too many Hollands floating around. And we spent hours talking about this. And again, it's not the last word on the subject. We are happy to discuss it. We are happy to try and come to an agreement with you about this program. But I think that it is something that we are sincerely interested in doing that I think can make a difference for that segment of people who are priced out by our super hot real estate market on Nantucket.
Thanks. I just wanted to add a few things. When we conceived this project, and you at the first meeting, Ed had talked about why condos. I think
Jamie,
we
you
were.
have to speak up a little bit.
I think going back to the very first meeting when you had talked to us why condos, our message has been pretty consistent. And I think even in my first interview with Josh Balling, we had talked about an instance of a retiree wanting to take equity out of their home so that they could continue to live on Nantucket during retirement. And so that was one of the scenarios that we had contemplated from the beginning, along with all of the workforce and vital people to our community that make too much to qualify for affordable or subsidized homes relative to AMI, but not enough to get into the housing market. And today there's only 3 homes on the market for sale under $750. One's just under $750, two's just under $650, nothing under $600. So there's this need in the market for year-round people who we all know, and so that's been a major focal point for us from the beginning, and is the only reason these condos are part of this project. If you think it's an important piece of the housing puzzle here on Nantucket. And so, anyway, that's what it's about. By the way, there's only 3 more units for sale between $750 and $850. So it's just, and none of those homes are new homes. So it doesn't mean you move in for that number and that's it. There's additional costs that are going to be required there. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as you stated, Just, this is the first time we've seen this too, and so we are interested in continuing the dialogue.
Good.
Does anybody, Ed, do you want to talk specifically about
Can
this?
I ask a question though
Absolutely.
first? Or Ed, could I ask one question first? Unless you're going to, I just have a question about the monitoring agent.
No.
Okay. I took this to be like a rough draft and an outline, just, that you guys are going to tighten up a lot and pull in references and all that with the restrictions that you cite. But when you mentioned the monitoring agent, who are you referring to? PAC?
Yeah, so with a 40B and in the 40B units, the
Right.
25%, there is a monitoring agent that gets selected and approved and plays a role in the original selection process, the lottery process, the income verification and approval process for an applicant.
Right, but is that traditionally the land bank?
No.
No. So that they do that for the affordable units, but not for the fair market. So I'm just wondering, is that monitoring agent, is there funds, is there the ability and authority for them to take on this whole other process that you're talking about?
Yeah, we would negotiate that with the monitoring agent to take on this different but somewhat similar role to enforce the deed restrictions on these units as well. And they get funded through, through the transfer, basically, of units. There's a percentage that goes, and there's an original amount that would be in the contract that would be part of the development cost of the project.
And Ed, who is the monitoring agent normally?
Let me back up a little
okay.
bit, and then I'll get to monitoring agent. I just wanted to clarify or amplify some of the comments that Josh made. In terms of the pricing model for the 40B affordable units, eligibility is at 80% of AMI. However, affordability, the pricing of the unit, has to be based upon 70% of AMI. And therefore, you create what's known as a window of affordability. If eligibility were at 80% and pricing were at 80%, the only households who would end up paying 30% of their income are the households right at the 80% number. So by pricing them at 70%, the prices are lower, and the persons or the households who are at 80% pay less than 30%. The households at 70% pay 30%. In addition to the income limitations, there are two other requirements for eligibility. One is an asset limitation, and the second is that you must be a first-time home buyer. There is also a local preference that is permitted on 40B projects that allows the sale of 70% of the affordable units to households who qualify under the local preference. And normally that is a resident of Nantucket or an employee of a business here in Nantucket, or a child in a school system. For Nantucket, that's a little easier than in some communities. The state, again, monitors 40B projects. When we talk about monitoring agents, we have to distinguish between two types. One is related to the sale of the units, known as the eligibility monitoring agent, who will review the applications. DHC, or Mass Housing, will sign off on every sale. So there's a lottery agent who's retained by the applicant. That lottery agent has to prepare a lottery plan, an affirmative fair housing marketing plan, have it approved by the agency, have information meetings, review the applications, specify what information has to be submitted, and then actually conduct the lottery. And the lottery is normally conducted by a third party. It might be at a select board meeting and picking sort of numbers out of a bowl. The monitoring agent monitors the work of the lottery agent. Lottery agent can't monitor itself. The second monitoring agent on 40B projects is the limited dividend restriction monitoring agent. The developers get great benefits in terms of increased density and other waivers. The cost to them of doing a 40B project, the primary costs are 25% of the units have to be sold to households based upon the pricing formula I just mentioned, and their profit is limited. Their profit is limited to 20% of certified costs. That gets monitored by the state. The state doesn't delegate that financial monitoring. Does that answer your question, Susan? The real important question is, without monitoring, none of these programs are as effective as they should be. So the board really has to think about, as this year-round program evolves, and I think this is a very innovative program. I like to say how I've worked on other 40Bs and have seen other programs. This is novel. I haven't seen this. Home ownership programs are much more difficult to design than rental programs, and it's a greater risk. If you make a mistake on a rental program, a lease is 12 months. Once a person gets a house, it's his or her house. So you want to do it right the first time. And I know the town, some of the affordable housing advocates are working on trying to develop this. I would certainly, to the degree it's possible, if you can establish some income restrictions on the year-round units, or think about other ways to achieve the objectives you're talking about, that would be great. One final comment: as I read the write-up, trying to tie me up here. As I read the write-up, I thought it said that those year-rounders could rent the units one time for a maximum period of 1 month.
That's right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I do have a follow-up question.
Each
So
year.
again, who would be, because I agree, a lot of
The developer has to fund
the monitoring
the
agent.
eligibility monitoring agent for 40B.
Right, but that's,
And you would ask that a mechanism be in place. And normally the mechanism is that, I think right now, and I'm not a lottery expert, that 2.5% of the sales price is used to fund the monitoring agent upon the sale of that unit. So there's a built-in mechanism to make sure that's funded. Initial sale is the developer's responsibility. Subsequent or resales come out of the sales proceeds.
But that's only on the 40B portion.
Oh, right, but I'm
On
saying
this
you need to
portion,
think about-
somebody else would have to pay this monitoring.
Right, you need
Someone
to
being the
think about how that's going to be
right,
done.
like the states, I don't think, I mean, is the state going to take this on? I don't think so. It'd have to be done at a local level.
No, I don't think the state.
Right, so who would be this monitoring agent that oversees this 30-year deed restriction to make sure that these are being sold and that they're like,
That's to be defined.
Well, not only
who pays for it?
Yeah, who it is and who pays for it, but
How
they
do you
have to have some
enforce it?
teeth.
Yeah, how do you enforce that? I mean,
So-
we've had,
Well, this gets abused sometimes. That's why you need a monitor.
Right.
You need to have a clear deed restriction. You need to have it in bold letters, even with deed restrictions like that. Very often, towns have lost units because proper monitoring was not done.
What do you mean lost units off the shot?
That they were sold and they weren't sold to
Oh, I see. Lost
the right
sort
person.
of into the abyss.
But that's not it's your job as the ZBA to work with the developer to make sure there's a monitoring program in place.
Right.
I would argue that if you can get out of the developer, that's great. If you share some of those costs, if you can get it out of the sales price, if you make it clear, if you use CPA funds, there's got to be a way to do that because we're talking about relatively small dollars for a very important item. My other concern is, and I'm hoping this is not an issue, the developer's aware of this, that we want to make sure that whatever program is proposed gets approval from DHCD, that we're not violating any fair housing rules. Given that it's market rate housing, I'm not sure that's going to be an issue, but that also enters into the income restrictions. Now, one of the good things about income restrictions is if you're looking for some, because even at these prices, this is, maybe it's workforce housing for Nantucket, but the normal definition of workforce housing is up to 120%. So with income restrictions, you might be able to make a better argument for third-party subsidy money. Nobody's going to give you subsidy money to reduce those prices further without an income restriction. So that would be the other argument. And again, I think the applicant has said he's already demonstrated that he's talking to people. Tucker knows more about this than I do, but I think it's definitely a program that we can all figure out.
Okay, thank you. Jill, you want to talk about this issue specifically? Please.
With the new plan that we're talking about, it sounded to me that there were only 15 units that were going to be on the shy list.
15 condos.
15 condos.
And 10 houses.
And 10 houses?
Yeah,
So that's
25.
25 units.
25,
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's much fewer units than at the larger level. So that's maybe 1 year of safe harbor. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 25%, which is what they're required. So as the number goes down overall.
I understand that, but
Right.
it's the minimum number. So I just
Yeah, it's the minimum number.
Also, it's my understanding that 30-year deed restriction is not the law, that you can do a longer restriction.
You can extend them. You can, right, you can apply to have it extended. Oh, sorry, you can, 30 years, if nothing's done, it would expire. If it's registered land, you'd have to get it taken off the certificate of title, but it would expire. And I believe you can apply to have it extended.
So then it can go off the shy list at 30 years.
No,
Well, those wouldn't be on the
Those are
shy list.
those are the ones that aren't on the list.
Okay. And then the other question I have is about who are the year-round qualified persons?
That needs to be defined way
By this
way more.
monitoring agent or something? But
What?
can't you just show up and say you're a year-round resident here? It's not that hard to register to vote.
Well, I don't think it would be. Yeah, obviously, there's going to have to be some mechanism. We're not there yet. But as I said, we just got this. It needs a lot of fleshing out. But yeah, the question is, how do you ensure that the program that's being advertised is going to work? And it's incumbent on the developer, the applicant, to come up with this program. And these are all valid points. So this is an outline.
Right.
Yeah. And lastly, I wanted to ask about the selling to nonprofits. I guess one of the concerns I had about that is I feel like you're pitting groups against one another. Plenty of nonprofit groups also have summer people that work for them who are seasonal. The Nantucket Community Sailing, for example. And it seems like a lot of our businesses actually need people they need to be buying these properties as well, potentially. So I'm just curious as to why nonprofits are getting, why are they superior to the businesses that are working very hard and trying to bring in workers? Many of these businesses are year-round.
I also had a question.
Do you want
could
to?
I ask a question that piggybacks on that?
Sure.
So I think, Josh, if you're answering that, you can answer this too. I had a similar question. I had a similar question about talking about when you're saying it's not to be used for the seasonal employee housing, but then under the mission-related purpose, you can use it for actors coming through, or, it says rotating through for changing performances, which seems to me much more of a higher use than if you had, seasonal, May to October type people living. And the same of the rotation of the physicians. So I don't know how you reconcile that, because there are year-round businesses that, their managers are here for maybe 8 months of the year, 7 months of the year.
I think that those are all good points and worth further discussion. Our thinking, and the reason that it's written this way, was we want to have Surfside Crossing be a community that's mostly year-round people, that is families, that is not full of transient, short-term residents. That won't be the case in every situation. For example, in the market rate cottages, there's no restriction, and I would expect many of those would be sold to people who would rent them for a month in the summer, or maybe even shorter-term periods of time. But back to the question of the condominiums and the nonprofits, we did think that it made sense to try to really steer those to the long-term, year-round employees of the nonprofit. And it's true, there is sort of a contradiction in this mission-related idea with some of the uses that people want, which would be more short-term. So I think that deserves further exploration and discussion. And there was one other point regarding the 30 years and the expiration. That relates to the non-40B units. The 40B units actually are deed restricted in perpetuity through a special program that DHCD runs and that is blessed and but doesn't apply, as I understand it, and is very difficult or maybe even impossible to make it apply to what's essentially a market rate beyond 80% or beyond 120%, 40B kind of a program. So that's why that had a limitation of 30 years with a right of first refusal we were building in for the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust at the end of that 30-year period.
There's no restriction in terms of the resale. You're restricted to selling it to another year-round resident, but there's no money restriction.
No.
No money restriction.
Okay.
And you
Yeah,
can't.
this needs more work.
Can I?
Absolutely.
Just in general, this is novel. This is great. I think it would be good in some other project. This is the 40B regime that they're coming forward, and why couldn't we just increase the number of affordable units and accomplish this instead of that? I know there are economic issues. We're obviously not going to get into them, but some number higher than 25%. Simplify this and try this other idea on some other project.
I agree.
Can I ask Josh a question? Is that
Sure.
okay? Was Beach Plum, is that a year-round community?
It's mixed. That's a 40B project. 25% of the units are restricted to people who earn 80% of the area median income or less, and those are all year-round people. And we went through the same reservation of 70% of those units for local Nantucket people, and then the other 30% were open to anybody who wanted to apply. But at the end of the day, 100% of the units are occupied by people who are Nantucket residents.
You mean for the, and are those?
For the 10, and then for the
Yeah.
for the market rate homes, there are some people who are year-round people, but most of them are seasonal.
Thank you.
So I'd contribute 3 ideas to this discussion. The first is from the perspective of someone who's done a lot of this housing. We have put together programs that have these restrictions run for 30 years, for 200 years. The 30 years are limited only for private restrictions, but if restrictions go to a governmental body, there's no limitation. So we've put together all kinds of possibilities that allow these things to go on for a long time. And I can also tell you from the point of view of someone who has had to deal with expiring 30-year restrictions, that comes a lot faster than you think. And when that happens, and then you try to get somebody to agree to continue those restrictions, they don't want to continue them. So to come up with programs that are limited to 30 years, that's not state of the art. There's a lot more that can be done. Second point I would make is that when they say that this is for residents only, that's not the program that they've described. What the documents describe is that you get to have the ability to buy these units if you agree this will be your primary residence. So if you're immigrating to the United States and you're in some foreign country, you have as much right to get this housing as if you are a current resident, because the test is, are you willing to say this is your primary residence? Are you willing to say this will become your primary residence? With that kind of test, this is not a program that's limited to current residents who are currently on the island. What they've described in this paperwork doesn't accomplish what they say. And the third point is that there's a lot of controversy throughout the nation about what constitutes primary residence. And if you look at some of the cases and what other states have done, if something is your primary residence, that doesn't mean it's your only residence. You can have a house off island and you can have a house on island. All you have to do is sign a piece of paper saying, this is going to be your primary residence. Those people who go to Florida know their experiment with the 6 months and 1 day rule. Well, there's no effort here for even the 6 months and 1 day. So literally, if a person declares this to be their primary residence and sleeps in it one night of the year, on the face of the papers that they have provided, they meet the test. So all of these things that they are proposing are impractical, virtually unenforceable, not the state of the art, and so much more could be done.
Thank you.
Can I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Briefly. Just that I think that we are trying to accomplish a year-round resident as the beneficiary here. We're not trying to figure out how to create loopholes. And while I understand that Mr. Durensis has many disputes and difficulties and objections to the overall project, if you would like to sit down and try and actually resolve some of these issues that you've raised, we'd be more than happy to do that with you, with an eye towards actually accomplishing what you say you also would like to see us accomplish.
I think that's a fair statement in that this sort of begs for a work group when we get to that point. I mean, this is the kind of thing that shouldn't be debated here. These are all good points you made, and this is if we decide as a board to go in this direction ultimately, or if you do, you might decide, oh no, we want to scrap this plan. So if we get to a point where a work group is going to make sense, so we can iron out all the minutia, which has to be ironed out.
Right.
I think a work group makes sense, but I don't think we're there quite yet. But I think it's a great idea. So,
Were you going to say something?
I
was, but you
go
can
ahead.
go first. Okay, thank you. My name is Joan Stockman. I live at 13 Warrow Lane. 3 things. I hope I can remember them all. One, I would encourage the ZBA to not have the town of Nantucket, which would be all of us, assume any of the financial cost for any kind of regulatory committee, ongoing oversight of a project that is about generating profits for the developers. The developers could take some of the tens of millions of dollars they will make from this project, and they could fund that in perpetuity, however it works. Your work group, Mr. Toole, could figure that out going forward. I would also say I have a little bit of a problem with the 20% profit that was mentioned by Mr. Marchand, I believe, because that is only what we had seen on the original Pell application, right? That's what the state is saying, 20%. We know that there's a lot of ways to make tens of millions of dollars more, for example, from the sale of units. So I would also keep that in mind, that we are not talking about a 20% profit potential here. We could be talking about a lot more than that. The other thing I would want to talk about is that Beach Plum Village, my understanding from a resident who lives in one of the affordable units is that out of the market rate units, there is 1 unit that is currently occupied year-round. So that's a small percentage. The last thing that I want to say is I've always worked for nonprofits, and so when I look at what the cost, I get it. I get the math. I understand that a $750,000 condo, that is going to cost me less than a $1.5 million house. I get the math. But when I do a little bit more math, and if I use a mortgage calculator and I look at, okay, I've got to come up with my tens of thousands of dollars of what my down payment is going to be, my 20% down payment if I can get a mortgage. When I'm looking at, we don't know what the interest rates are going to be at that point. There's thousands of dollars in additional homeowners association fees that are associated both with the condos and with the standalone units. So I'm, again, worked at nonprofits my entire career. For a studio apartment, if I put down 20%, if I can get a 30-year mortgage, including all the fees, I'm looking at about $2,000 a month at today's rates, if depending on how much the units increase. If I'm looking at one bedroom, $2,500, I don't think I have made that in a month in my salary for most of the nonprofits I've worked for. Two bedroom is about $3,000. 4-bedroom is about $3,500. And again, these are rough numbers. We don't know what the rates are going to be. Maybe your great aunt dies and you get most of the down payment. We don't know what it is. And then I guess I just have to take issue with the whole year-round affordable thing for the standalone units, because if we use the same math and we look at a 20% down mortgage payment, and if I've got my 30-year fixed rate, whatever, I'm looking at $9,000 or $10,000 a month. I don't know a lot of Nantucket families who can afford that. I don't know a lot of it. That doesn't qualify as year-round affordable to me. So thank you.
Okay. I would like to move on from the outline of the year-round thing, unless we have a few more specific questions. No, about the outline plan only, not about.
Just on this, what's up there? On the.
Okay.
Okay. I guess.
Please keep it brief.
It is. I got 3 points. So my concern mostly is the monitoring agent and how that person is chosen, right? By who does it? I guess maybe the developer. What kind of enforcement authority this person has on if they find a violation to these restrictions? How do they enforce it? Okay. What kind of teeth? And the other concern is if the eligibility agent is funded by property transfers, there's a conflict. Immediately, the more transfers the person approves, the more money he or she. And then finally, it's more of a global thing, are we setting up for somebody to be able to knock on people's doors at any time and ask for their papers? Is that really where we're headed with this kind of project? Thanks.
Thank you. Again, I think that the minutia of this plan needs a lot more working on. So we're not there yet. I don't think the developer's there. I think if we get to a point where we all want to go down this road, we'll have a work group, we'll make sure that all these questions are answered. Because we have the same concerns. So, are we good with that?
Sure. Just about this that I was going to say before. I want to say to the developer that I think, and echoing what Jim and Danny said, I think this is a great program, and like Ed Marchand said, I think it's a novel idea. I think that the amount of research and basically policy making that needs to go into making this be successful and be a workable program is going to would take us, even if the town was to do this on their own, way beyond the January 15th date that we're looking at. I think if the developer can put the pencil to the paper and see if there's a way to add some more affordable 40B units or 100%, look at Satem's Path, how they did 80, I think they did 80, 100, and 150, and still keep it economic. That would be a easier, cleaner, better way to meet a similar goal without creating. I appreciate the idea of this. I just don't know that we're going to be able with this project to come together and have it be meted out in the meaningful way that you want it to be.
Well, even if you go 80, 150 to 200, whatever, you still need the same program.
Right, but those would be 40. Right, but those would be 40B units, not like.
No, they're not 40B units. Once you go past 8. No, Satem's Path was a 40B.
Yeah.
But only 25% of them were
80.
Were 80.
But the other ones had this paperwork similar to the 80
Right, they were
for the
They
monitoring
did,
agent.
but you still need, that's my point, you still need the program.
Right,
Yeah,
but not
but
a separately funded program.
Well, it must have been separately funded in that only the 80% units were in some way, I assume, monitored by the state agency. I think it's not the housing trust. It's anyway. The bottom line is you still need a program, and there's a lot of details one way or the other that need to be worked out. Is this specific to the program?
Yes, it is. Look, if you have a deadline that you have to meet very quickly, and everybody agrees that this plan is very amorphous, it's like Brexit. You know, we're going to discuss.
It's not quite like Brexit. So let's.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Speaking of Brexit, let's get to the point.
Let's just get to this point then. If we're not going to be able to flush this out, and you're not going to be able to by January, whatever it is, when you have to make a decision, then I think that you have to make the decision based on the fact that there is no such plan, and only that you have is a minimum 40B.
Thank you.
I've been waiting. I forgot one. Two quick comments. Mindy Levin, 10 Folger. One is we're talking about year-round housing, and then we're talking about transfer property. So hopefully there won't be too many transfer properties for year-round housing. And I also don't think you should all be asked to act as HDC. You have a big job as ZBA. We've elected an HDC, and I think it's HDC's job to approve it, and your job as ZBA.
Thank you. Tucker, did someone say you wanted to say something?
Were you
there you
trying
are.
to say something?
Did you want to say something?
Tucker Holland. I just was going to clarify just what you were saying, Mr. Chairman, is correct that in the case of Sachem's, you have different monitoring agents for each of the levels that they created. And I just may briefly add, we definitely, so somebody walks in my door, whether it's someone from Tipping Point or it's the developer, asks for input and advice, I give it to them. So some of it gets taken, some of it doesn't. We certainly talked about the income restriction being something that is easier to get a handle around. I think there's a little bit of work still going on in that regard, but as you are getting to, we really need to get to the details. I may simply say a work group sooner rather than later may be useful given the time frame, but I leave that to you.
Well, I can only assume, let's cut to the chase on the extension idea. January 15th is, I don't know, a month and a half away. We just saw this plan. The notion of January 15th, in my mind, is out of the question. So I'm assuming that the developer, the applicant, is going to grant us an extension.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we understand that you're going to need some additional time.
Thank you.
And we are anxious to work with you to create a schedule, to get a series of meetings established, to see what we can do in terms of organizing the work that needs to take place. These are your decisions, not ours. We totally understand that. But we're looking forward to working with you, but also to move this thing along. So,
well, again,
I'm sure you agree with that as well.
I do. I won't editorialize on it. So, why don't we get off the plan for a moment? We have about an hour left, and let's talk a little bit about the plans. If we have any comments about the plan.
I have questions on the condo plans. Can you tell me which units are affordable in the different buildings? Have they been categorized as which ones would be affordable?
Not at present.
Okay,
No.
That would be. Yeah, no. I'm asking about the condominiums because I'm just curious about the basement units. First of all, it just seems really depressing to live completely in a basement, but I just want to make sure that the affordables are spread throughout the building appropriately and that they don't end up being in the basement. So that would be something that I think I definitely need to see.
taking that one step further, I think the basement units are, I agree with Lisa 100%. They're
Horrible?
I'm not going to characterize them as horrible, but they're certainly inferior.
Yeah,
And the lack of light, ventilation, access to the outside, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think at an absolute minimum, none of those units would be affordable. They could not designate any of the basement units as affordable. So, and I want to go a step further if we're going to be concentrating on the condos. I've said from the beginning, I was not a fan of the big buildings. I think the buildings still should be cut up into, basically each building cut into two, creating much more of something else other than what we have. More of a village concept, hopefully not with all of the parking ringing the perimeter of the subdivision. I think that, quite frankly, if we want to get into the math of this whole thing, the 285 bedrooms that are presently proposed is roughly 21 an acre, which is far in excess of anything that we've seen on Nantucket. So one quick partial solution to that is you get rid of the basement units 100%. So I think you should seriously consider that, and in the process of making these buildings smaller, creating a village. The whole two developments within one development really bothers me. I think that you're setting up this whole, here are all the year-rounders, and here are all the summer people. I just think that's unhealthy. And I think if you can somehow mitigate that through design, if nothing else, I think it would be helpful. But again, in terms of the condo units, if you were able to cut them up into more, I don't know if you want to call them townhouses or whatever, some of your units are townhouses, creating some private outdoor spaces, or at one point in our discussion there was talk about a grill, and there was like one grilling spot for 60 units. I can see everybody queuing up. I mean, I started at breakfast, but it's dinner, so I'm good. So I think there needs to be a much greater, a lot more thought given to those condos.
Right. I was also noting that the only entrance, there's no storage, exterior storage for any of these units. So they have one place to go in. A lot of them go in through private doors into the units from the porch area. I just wonder about storage of stuff. You know how people leave, I don't know what it would be, like their bike, even shoes, messy fishing poles. I mean, there has to be something put in place for these people that are going to be actively living there, particularly if they're year-round people. We know how active Nantucket is to deal with some of the stuff that ends up even on my house, on my front porch, and doesn't get put away, and how that's going to be handled.
Can I just respond to a couple of these thoughts? On the storage, so the units that, on the storage, for the units that we weren't able to put in a very large utilities type storage room for things like bikes and whatever, boogie boards. We've provided storage units in the basements. So most of the units have, I think all of the units have one or the other as far as the storage space is concerned, because that's obviously something we're concerned about as well. And then the 2 and the 3 bedroom, there's a bunch of the 2 and 3 bedroom units that are set up as townhouses, so that, you know, one floor out of 2 or 3 end up in the lower level. So that was part of our current design and arrangement.
In the basement?
Yeah.
But back to the storage,
That's not
Jamie.
the plan I have. Sorry, Lisa.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to say to the basement, I don't think providing interior storage is what I think there has to be something that understands that people are lazy. They don't want to carry their bike even inside or to the basement or to...
So we have designated bike rack areas, certainly for bikes.
What about, surfboards, I mean, there's just, people have stuff. Messy shoes. I don't know. I just think about the stuff that gets left on anybody's front porch. And now you're going to have 6 private entry doors going into each unit. That's going to have all this stuff. And I don't want these beautiful porches that are, they're going to cost a lot of money. They're help with the look of the house, the building certainly, just to be filled with junk.
Totally agree, and we'll give it some thought.
Okay, let me just correct you. If I'm looking at these plans correctly, unless these are not the plans, none of these plans connect through from the basement upstairs. They're all single units in the basement, no stairway.
So that's not
Town hall.
that's not the latest plan then.
So we don't have the latest plan, is what you're saying. It's very difficult to, when you get up as a developer and say you'd like to continue to make progress, and it quite frankly irritates me when you talk about making progress and we don't have the current plans.
They were submitted last year.
Yeah, you're right.
So I think we have the presentation from the last meeting. I think those plans are. Can you pull that up? Do we have
Is this not
that?
what we have in our packet?
So what we have in our packet is basically more recycling and nothing, why do I look at this? Why do I spend time looking? I mean, quite frankly, I'm irritated.
We didn't submit that for this meeting.
Did you submit something for last meeting that has the right plans?
So was
That's
there anything
it.
new submitted? So don't, please, all I'm asking you is, do not sit there at the mic and talk to me about how you're interested in, basically implying that we're not moving fast enough, because it irritates the heck out of me. If we don't have the information, we have nothing to work with. We got the information on the clubhouse one day before the meeting, or 2 days. That's inadequate. I have a life. Everybody else here, we're volunteers, keep in mind. So you need to get the information to us in a timely manner.
Okay, so the plans that we submitted for the last hearing and that we went through does show the most recent condo configuration. How that got into this week's packet, I do not know.
Is this one from last year? So what's the last meeting, October? Yeah. I gotta find it. I have all my packets here. This is from the.
It's
This doesn't have a townhouse.
They're the same. They're the same. They're the same. We have the packet from October 3rd.
And that has not changed.
Yeah, but Jamie specifically said that some of the lower units connected to the first floor.
No, that's not correct.
That's not true. That's what I'm saying.
All the townhouse units essentially originated at the first floor.
Okay.
Right, first and second, not the basement. All I'm saying is take a serious look at getting rid of the basement units.
I stand corrected. I apologize.
Thank you. All right, so now that we've gotten that settled, I will go back to, if you have new material, please get it to us in a timely manner. And the timely manner is not 2 days before the meeting. Okay, now that I've vented,
A couple things for me, if you don't mind.
go ahead.
The fact that you have some drainage swales and rainwater structures in the buffer zone, I think is unacceptable. I think that when this project takes place, that entire buffer zone is going to get cleared. It's got to get replanted in a very, very substantial way, especially in the north, south, and east sections. West areas, where the parking lots butt right up to the buffer zone. I don't like that plan in general. I think you're subjecting the people on those property lines to a lot of potential noise and light pollution. I think that ought to get rethought. The buffer zone has to be substantially planted. I think I also agree with Ed's point that some sort of a unit mix would be better. I don't like the fact that all these condos are jammed into one section. Smaller buildings. And frankly, guys, I really think that rather than come up with some, I'm sure you put a lot of effort into this whole affordability thing. Consider lessening the density somehow, possibly instead. That's how I feel right now.
Well, the 22 units, they're roughly, just FYI, I counted 22 units. I was missing a page. I don't know what Building D has. I don't think I was missing it. I don't think I was given it. Building D has in their basement, but it's 22 units if you get rid of the basements. If you cut the buildings into smaller sections, maybe you're giving up 1 unit per building. That's another 5. There's a way to get there. And I don't think we're there yet. A couple other comments on the single-family home area. You have one of the affordable units on the curve, which is a funky lot. It's small. The usable space is much smaller.
Lot 7.
Yeah, lot 7. That's not going to fly.
That might not even want to be a lot for anybody. I mean, you can't put anything there.
I mean, that's a good point. The other thing is, many of your plans seem to indicate that most, if not all, I don't think all, but most of the affordable units do not have exterior access to the basement. They all have to have exterior access. I don't want to single out other subdivisions, but sometimes you can tell which units are affordable because the people can't put their stuff anywhere. And so it's outside. You need to have access to space.
But do you think that was in response to concerns about renting out, finishing basements and adding extra bedrooms and having people rent?
Well, all the market rate units have them.
Right. Well, maybe that's...
But they can finish their basement and the affordables can't? I mean, we would restrict it.
I mean,
I'm saying I don't think it's a reasonable distinction to single out those affordable units not to have access to their basement from the outside. I'm not saying it has to be a walk down.
Yeah.
It could be a bulkhead.
Right, if you're concerned
just like
about
Satcham's Bath had a bulkhead. A couple other minor details. I'd like to see brick sidewalks, not the blacktop. So Jeffrey, are you saying you don't want to see the drainage swales in the buffer zone at all?
I don't think they should be in the buffer zone. I think the buffer zone should be a buffer zone. The drainage swales are planted with material, sort of a low plant material, and it's not a buffer.
Right.
Good point.
Actually, there was something in the selectmen's that said map and avoid wherever possible mature pitch pines greater than 8 inches in buffer and cleared areas.
I mean, do you think the intention of the ZBA would be to say you cannot touch anything within that 25-foot buffer?
I would love to see that because I know exactly what's going to happen. When the site guys get on this site, they're going to clear it right to the property lines. I think that there should be a real restriction of the buffer zone, and then the existing planting in the buffer zone should be augmented.
Those are basically.
That's what we did for Satcham's, right?
What's that?
That's how we handled it for Satcham's.
That they didn't touch it?
I think so.
Yeah, there was fencing, even.
We made them put up the
Yeah, we made them put up fencing so that wasn't.
In terms of the clubhouse building, which is almost as big as one of the condos, I see that it has a commercial kitchen in it. I'm assuming you're not planning to, and needless to say, we would condition this and restrict it. But you're not intending to have functions in there, I assume.
I think the rationale for including that is that the residents of the association could have functions in there amongst themselves. That's what it's set up for. And the thinking was that for the people that have condos and they're not necessarily great spaces to entertain or to have a kid's party or something like that, if you're going to invite some families over and maybe go bowling in the basement, you can have a space that would, provide for provision for that type of activity.
Yeah. What did I say? Anyway, thank you.
It would be helpful too on the plans, just when you submit new plans, that they have dimensions on them. Overall dimensions on the building. The length, width, height?
On the site plan in addition to the
No, on the
architectural
architectural plans. There was a graphic scale, and I was trying to do the math because it was reduced and got very confused.
Yeah, that's fair. Don, I have a question for you. Are you, I know that there were some communication problems with John Chesia. Have you, and/or I think you mentioned that there might be, you're still having difficulty fitting all the drainage in. Is that the case?
No, not really. The communication has gotten much better yesterday and today since Eleanor gave him a call, try to push things along for us, which we appreciate. Even yesterday and today, there are some things that we don't agree on, in particular what's been done at Sachem's Path and what's been done at Tacoma Green. Mr. Chesia doesn't agree that those type of systems meet the regulations 100%. He has, the interpretation, you can see it his way, but you can also see it the way the town in Horsley and Witten designed those, how it can be interpreted that way as well. For instance, the rain gardens that we proposed, the low-impact development that Jeff was referring to, we could take those, we could come up with another option rather than have the rain gardens. I think we're getting a lot of messages from people, even your hydrogeologist at the last meeting, that type of LID treatment is preferred. We can still do catch basins to large water quality tanks, like we're currently showing on the plan for the residential section. We can do that in the condo section. I had mentioned a new type of design that Tacoma Green has as of right now that's been reviewed and approved by Pecci, which includes what they call a storm tree system, which you have a catch basin next to a container with a tree and a media where the rainwater goes into that first, gets filtered, then after it's filtered, goes into the subsurface system. There's some overflows. It's sort of like a bypass type system. Horsley and Witten and Pecci agree that that meets the stormwater standards. Mr. Chesia doesn't, as far as the sizing and the TSS removal and that sort of thing. But I think what he does agree on is that we can still do the tanks, which isn't the LID type of system, which isn't what we've heard, what people want. We do want to go LID as much as possible. So right now, we're looking at some sort of hybrid type design using these street trees that he may not agree we should get the credit that everyone else has been getting on island, but in conjunction with the tank and the catch basins. So that type of hybrid system we could use around the condos, we could use around the single family units. Which,
if the unit count is lowered and the parking requirements are, I know you exceed the requirement, but if the unit count is lowered, do you have a better chance of fitting those rain garden? I like the rain garden idea.
Well, and just to be clear, I like the rain gardens too. I just don't like them in the buffer zone.
Right.
Yeah, they're very effective. So.
Right, but I have to think that you'd have problems fitting them in with this plan because they come right up to the parking lot.
Well, it's relative to the layout, the number of parking spaces, and building sizes.
Fewer units. Is that going to make it easier or more difficult to fit these in?
Well,
It depends on the design of the buildings, because if they're just removing the basement units and the building footprints don't change,
Good point.
so.
I did suggest that they cut them up and lose a unit.
Here and there, yeah. So you'd end up with a little bit more. But do you have
I had a
clear
similar
in the center,
oversight.
No, you would need less parking is what I was saying.
Yeah, and couldn't you use this whole thing?
Well, if it was all rain gardens, it would be hard to play football in there
Yeah,
or stickball or whatever
Yeah.
kids do today, talk on their phones. So, no, I was thinking you would reduce the paved area.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Although I have to say, I'm sort of concerned that there's not a lot of parking as it is, but maybe on,
Well, there's
200 spaces.
There's 200 spaces for 285 bedrooms. It's drawn.
Yeah.
Again, I
Well-
can't remember how many bedrooms were in the basement units. I want to say it was 37 maybe.
Oh, I can look it up. What's the-
33 bedrooms. So, I mean, we're getting, everything gets better. As the traffic gets less, we're a little less concerned about, instead of 60 cars, it's 50 cars. You know, I'm making that up, obviously. Everything gets a little better. So I appreciate, you know, the efforts you've made so far, but unfortunately, we have not really gotten a chance to talk about the plan much because of other issues. It seems to me that if this were a single-family home development throughout, there'd be roughly space to put in roughly 68 houses, and I don't know where the drainage would go in that regard. So 68 units, you know, roughly 3.5 bedrooms apiece. So it's probably closer to 64 and that would be with no pool or clubhouse. So I think I don't think we're there yet. How does everyone else feel?
Well, no, I mean, I agree. I think we brought up some good points about the density and the way that the buildings are designed and laid out and the buffer zone, and we should see what they can come back with. Also, just think about practical things we haven't talked about, like, you know, trash for the apartments, mail.
The mail is,
Yeah, the
mail issue.
There is a mail room in the clubhouse building, but you can't get behind the boxes to put the mail in. So that might need to be thought out. And, you know, obviously that's a detail. And
It's a detail, but I just think there's a lot of things to
there's a lot of things. I mean, you potentially have, if there are 2 people in every bedroom, you potentially have 570 people living here in a very small area, and it's an urban scale project, even if it's reduced to the single family density. So at roughly 5,000 feet is what I'm talking about per lot.
Yeah, I got it.
I had a list of other things too. You know, ultimately, we obviously still need to see more detailed landscape plans, but I think it's still a little premature. There did seem to be, the shed issue. Are the sheds included with every lot? Is that your intention?
I think they show it.
So they're included. They come with the house, I mean. Every house gets a shed. Okay. Just want to be clear. It wasn't just drawn on and then to be built later, which is totally reasonable too. I just want to be clear. Obviously, we would have to need to see a design in the shed. Parking, we talked a little bit about. I mean, we'd obviously get into greater detail later on as to, I know that in Sachem's Path, I think we restricted it to no boats parked in the area, no RVs, that kind of thing. There are no garages shown on the plan. It's not your intention to ever apply for garages. I did see on one of the little sketch plans, I think you had a spa. If you intend to do that, that would have to be part of the plan on each and every lot that you intended. Again, when we get into the real nitty-gritty, is overnight parking allowed? I think in Sachem's Path, for instance, overnight parking on the street is not allowed, so people don't park their car there for months on end. Again, it becomes an enforcement issue. It's a homeowner issue. The sidewalks I talked about, I'd like to see brick unless it's a deal killer. I think it's much more attractive, and I think it would Make it all nicer, patios. I think we talked about. You talked, Lisa, about the condominium allocation, the allocation of the affordable units. We have to see that sooner rather than later.
I'd also like to, should we see 4 elevations of each structure? Right now, we only have the front and the back.
I thought they were included in your packet, but
Nope. Well, I didn't see them.
No,
We only have the long elevations of all the buildings. I think when we get to this point, again, since we're looking for some reduction in density, when we get to that point, it'd be helpful to have elevations of all 4 elevations for every structure that is being reviewed.
Yeah, we have front and back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think ultimately, since we get to play HCC, we have to see detailed quarter-inch, with everything called out.
Right.
And this,
The
that, and other
materials,
thing.
everything else.
No, again, I'm not saying you should have had that by now,
No,
because we're not
just saying,
there.
right.
But we're getting there.
Just saying that in the future, for us to respond, we need that information.
I mean, I think that could be a whole meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that's sort of my checklist. Trash, you mentioned. I mean, there has to be some thought how trash, especially in the condos.
Those in the condos, because I could see people just putting it outside their door.
Yeah, I don't see how that
Until they-
works at all with that many people. Again, I have a problem with the perimeter parking. Just, I didn't even count the number of spaces, but it's just, I don't know, just, and then there's a fence around it, obviously, to block it from the neighbors, which is great, but there's no opportunity to put trees in it. There's no opportunity for landscaping other than the fence. So I don't think it would be I don't think it'd be very nice.
It's a stockade, yeah.
Anybody else have any comments? No?
I have one thing.
Go for it.
So I have a hypothetical scenario. If I qualify for one of these homes, I'm a business owner, and I want to get, let's say, summer help. What's to stop me from putting 6 mattresses in a room and loading up one of the bedrooms with workers? Who's going to enforce that? And what's the teeth in that? It's one of the biggest loopholes I see with these 40Bs. We let things slide, and either they show up on Zillow or whatever as a rental, or it just loads up and there's 6, 7 cars where they're not supposed to be, with bedrooms loaded up, which increases traffic, trash, you name it. So if you don't have an answer for that now, that's fine, but by December 5th, I definitely want you guys to have a plan.
Right, and so having an on-site property management office, so that it's manned on a daily basis, and that individual or individuals are interacting with all of the residents within the community. The property management company, the idea is to have them handling all of the landscaping, all of the exterior painting through the HOA fees, so that there's a lot of interaction and a lot of presence there. And actually, as part of the restrictions, we had talked about any rental. So in the instance that each unit can rent a unit for up to one time, up to a month, they would have to submit a copy of their lease to the property manager as part of that process. So we're hoping that would be the monitoring element.
Well, what if that didn't mean anything to me and I just kept on violating? Are you going to point and say that person's in violation?
So that becomes part of the HOA docs and that we have to develop.
Yeah, HOA docs and condominium docs typically cover that, but I would also say that if it is prevalent on the island, which is what you seem to be predicating your question on, the Board of Health has big enforcement rights. It's clearly a violation of the laws that limit the occupants per unit, and it would be no different for this development than for any other property on the island.
Yeah, quite frankly, I think the enforcement question, Kiram, is a great one. And it's a problem out here. I think we all know that. Now, I'm not defending the development at all, but the fact that they're trying to sell these units at pretty hefty numbers, I would think at least when they're involved, it will be super tight. And then as a homeowner who's paid 2.1 or whatever $1 million, I would hope that you'd have greater interest in enforcing it.
But it's to your point earlier that the condos are sort of set to the back of the property. They don't even have to go back there. That becomes.
I have a question.
I agree with that.
Are you proposing to limit all of the units to 1 month's rental period? Just the condominiums or all of the units?
Just the condos.
Just the condos?
I think that's what it was.
Why have any rental available to the I mean, if these are year-round residences, you arguably live in it year-round.
We just thought that it would be a nice accommodation for a resident to be, if they want to go away for a month during any point of the year, and they had the option to rent it, that would be a reasonable accommodation. What we're trying to avoid is not having these units go to boarders. And so, how do you find that balance without completely not allowing that rental right?
But I just.
Go ahead.
No, finish.
Well, it's not uncommon, for instance, if you own an apartment in New York, you don't get the accommodation of being able to Airbnb it if you're in a co-op. I mean, I don't think that is a necessary thing in terms of being able to sell a unit.
Is that the preference of the board, not to have an accommodation for one-time rental?
It definitely, I think, simplifies things not to have that an additional issue with rental.
I mean, I think
and
maintenance of that.
And I am to the woman who spoke earlier about just the cost of the units. I find I think it's going to be hard for people to afford a 3-bedroom unit or a 4-bedroom, and I'm sure there's going to be boarders. I don't know how you prevent that from happening, or how you police it. I'm not sure an on-site manager can enforce it to that degree, but I guess you'll have to develop that. It just seems.
I mean, it's relying on the other people living in there and there being some level of awareness and some desire to report, and then hopefully the idea is that the enforcement part of it won't be a problem, but the information has to get there.
I quite frankly think the property manager is a huge step. I mean, normally you have nobody in development. I mean, if are you dedicating one of these units to the property manager?
Where are they going to live?
No, not at this point.
So they would live off-site?
What, they have an on-site office, and that would be part of the contract.
I think it might be better to have somebody on site all the time in case there are noise issues or maybe, I don't know.
It's something we considered, and it was something we were thinking about when we reduced the plan.
I mean, it's sort of like having a super in a building. He's there all the time. He's watching. Joe's trying to Airbnb his unit. We got to get on it. So I think it's something you should consider because there's a lot going on in here.
Right.
At least, certainly as it's laid out now. I think that would go a long way in terms of enforcement.
I agree.
I agree.
So. Anything else? You want to speak?
No, ready. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, thanks for all your comments. You've made my presentation shorter. If I could ask
Speak up.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Channel.
I basically was saying thank you. You made my comments shorter because you answered some of or at least asked some of the questions I was going to. If somebody behind me could talk and I can set up the plans on the overhead, That way you can look at them or the public can see them and not the, all right?
Joan Stockman again, 13 Wero Lane, or as this plan is telling me, 25 feet away from 72,650 square feet of pavement and parking. So from the corner of your desk there, behind our dear friend Linda Williams, that is a distance from my property line to 72,650 feet of parking. We're just talking, that's just the condo area. I appreciate your comments about the buffers. I appreciate your comments about the parking and the roads being around the perimeter. It's kind of the shopping mall thing, which I didn't really think we would see in a residential area in Nantucket, where you have massive commercial industrial-sized development surrounded by all the parking and the roads and such. When you look at, again, I have to say it one more time, 72,650, that's just the condo part of it. Again, my backyard. If you want to compare this to what the town database, the assessor's database tells me, the Palace of Justice currently is only 25,000 square feet of pavement. The Mid-Island Stop and Shop.
I don't want to be rude, but the
Yes,
Brexit
please.
thing, the Palace of Justice, just make your point.
Okay, my
and move on.
apologies
There's a
for
lot of
being fresh.
parking. We got it.
Yes, it's a ridiculous amount of parking, and it is a wildly inappropriate development for a residential area. And I'm very grateful for the comments that you have made about, could you break the buildings down? Could you make it so that it's not 4 or 5 monstrously large? And that's interesting, because look at that great big open space. We're not seeing where the condos and stuff are back there. And that's what I would ask, that the ZBA not approve anything that is going to have that size, that kind of mass of development. That's the point that I'm making. If 66,000 square feet, if you combine all those buildings, and I didn't know about the recreation center, so I'm not sure if that's adding another 10,000 square feet of a massive development in a residential area. And, if you compare that to Stop and Shop, I think, is 41,000 square feet. And so, we're talking a huge mass. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, a huge, massive development. And I'm grateful to see this up here, because this is what we're talking about. We have been looking for hours and hours while you guys are working hard up there. We're facing the screen where there's such pretty green ink everywhere. It's so green, and it is so wildly misleading, because, when you look at the big puffy what have yous, one of you gentlemen had mentioned that it's 40 feet of road and parking, and then it's a 25-foot buffer, and the buffers don't look like anything like what we've been looking at for the last several hours. It's scruffy, slimpy pine, it's poison ivy, it's bayberry, it's scrub oak. It's nothing like what we're seeing up there. And so if we do get this kind of development, I would be really grateful, as your suggestion, to have no cut zones, to have buffers that are actually intact and maybe augmented. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bruce Perry. So the plan that's up there is page 25 of your packets, but printed out small. You guys can't see what it says. My first comment's on page 21, which is the cover page. And it talks about the proposed zoning table with side yard and front yard setback, et cetera. Since this board is basically making up the zoning for this parcel, I was going to suggest that right now they're asking for a 0 front yard setback. At the same time, they're looking for a 4-foot wide sidewalk and a 3.5-foot wide strip to the road. Based on that, they could have a house looming 7 feet away from from the next car that pulls in. So my suggestion would be to maybe require some sort of front yard setback so they can move the houses back. There's also a conflict between their ground cover ratio and their last submitted plans. They're asking for 50% maximum ground cover, but further on in their waiver request, they're reducing it to 30. So if they could get their plans, when they revise them, to say the same thing. Okay? All right, so around the perimeter, as you earlier mentioned, they're talking about the undisturbed buffers. In the undisturbed buffers contains all 3 drainage swales, or the rain gardens. The one on the west swale, which is furthest to the left, looks like, the best I could make out, they're digging down about 3 or 4 feet to the top of the swale where the grass is going to be growing. and it goes right up to the property line. In addition, all the other two swales also have excavations that go pretty close to the property line. They're also proposing in the undisturbed lots about 1,100 linear feet of 6-foot tall stockade fence. I don't know if you guys have tried to put a fence in pitch pine scrub oak landscape. You can't do it easily, so the rest of that buffer zone will be cleared. So also nothing like 1,100 feet of stockade fence says welcome to the community. And then outside of the two lots in lot 47 and 45, there is another 300 feet of stockade fence and ones that are supposed to be permanently protected as open space and buffer. So again, they're putting up a structure with no ability to maintain them, because in their restrictions they put on, which is page 21, doesn't allow that. So so there's those issues. The next issue is private water supply. Last meeting, everybody talked at length about public water supply and whether or not this project is going to impact the town's water system. So what I want to talk about is the lots to the south initially. Let me get their privates. Zemicki, Meredith, and Weinhold properties. Looking at the plan, I'm thinking that Zemicki's private well is about 37 feet from the edge of the rain garden trench. It's just way too close, all right? Same thing and with the one in the middle, the Meredith properties, I think they're about 120. And then Weinhold Properties has their private well 40 feet or so away from the roof drainages for those two lots that are right above them. I think what the project proponent needs to do is provide the cone of influence for each one of those wells that are required for your septic system. It basically looks like a little racetrack oval where it shows where these private wells. So right now, if you put a septic system in, the cone of influence to the up gradient is 100 feet. So clearly, that rain garden and whatever runs off from the parking lot, et cetera, is going to impact fairly quickly Zemicki's wells and possibly Weinhold's. So they need to show that their proposed stormwater handling system is not going to impact those to the south. In addition to the two lots to the west, I only see their names on, I think one is a Trainer and one is Mellow or something like that. It's hard to read in the plans. Where are their private wells, and are the much larger rain gardens going to impact their system? So the concern is generally groundwater is flowing from north to south here, heading out to the ocean and to Mycomma Pond. And so then these wells are down gradient. And that hasn't been discussed that I'm aware of as part of the submittals. There's a number of questions submitted in the Chestnut and Bracken August letters that haven't been answered. So they have to go through that. The landscaping and replanting plan is pretty clear, with few exceptions, that the entire property is going to be cleared. And there's been no real plan submitted in how they're going to reestablish these undisturbed buffers and or what they're going to plan between the houses and around the condos. Excuse me. We need more detail, because do we really want to have another subdivision that will end up being a sea of non-native privet hedges right on South Shore Road? Okay, condo lot and buildings. Top of foundation on all the buildings are between 2.5 to 3 feet above the existing contours, and all of them. So that's even before you put a first floor framing. So basically the first floor is 2.5 to 4 feet above the existing grade. So the basement and buildings B and C up to the north, all the exterior windows face the north. There will be never any sunlight directly into those apartments from those windows. And the ones to the west, they'll get partial sunlight some time of the year. So that's definitely a quality of life issue that some of the board members already talked about. I guess the community lot, it says it doesn't need a waiver from zoning. I guess if you make it up, you don't need to. But I don't quite understand why something that is 60% impervious building, pool patio, and parking lot, at least, it doesn't need a waiver from whatever zoning is going to be made up for this lot. So and finally, not finally, but last page. As the board has mentioned, there's no plans for the trash, recycling, storage, or removal from the condos or the individual lots. There's no lighting plan, which is critical in Nantucket with the Dark Skies Initiative and some of the nonprofits we have on this island. It's very important that we keep the skies dark. There's no sewer disposal plan. This plan shows a pumping facility and then a line that goes down South Shore Road with a force main. Is that the final plan? Is that the plan they're working with? We don't know. Right now, they're collecting sewage there, and we don't know where it's going or how it's getting there. Community building that just got the plans on Monday has a sales office on the second floor. Is that going to be restricted to sales of properties on this parcel, or is it going to be commercial use in a residential area? And I couldn't see in this small plans that I got whether or not there was any handicapped access to the first floor, to the basement, or the upstairs, and how it's going to be handled. And that's about it. That's what I'm going to stick with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of good points. I have a quick question for Ed Marchand. Do any of the units have to be handicapped accessible?
This is an area I normally don't get to. The architect will have to certify compliance with all AAB requirements. My understanding, however, is that there are no handicap requirements for sale units.
Okay.
There are requirements in terms of making any common areas accessible, I believe. Okay.
All right. Just going over some of Bruce's points. Yeah, on the, and to Rachel's point, to Lisa's point, when next time you give us the architectural plans, you should show us, just like you were going to the HCC, existing grade, proposed grade, height, blah, 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 all the pertinent measurements that you would normally submit. Again, I'm not saying next week. The rain garden issue, I guess, is to Don. Even assuming you can get it out of the buffer zone, does the rain garden need to be away from wells like a septic system?
If it's a subsurface disposal leaching system, then it has to have a 100-foot setback like a septic system. And I know at the last meeting I really buzzed through this pretty quick, but I did actually address a lot of the comments. We do show the neighbors' wells that are in the area of concern. We did locate these wells, which are far enough away that they're not a concern. This rain garden area right here is going to be a sealed rain garden, and the leaching system itself, after it gets filtered through the rain garden, there's an under drain, and there's also an overflow in the rain garden itself. So nothing will go in the ground in this area. It will go to this leaching system or subsurface system that's actually outside the zone 2 and meets the 100-foot separation from that well. The top of foundation elevations, this is not a single-family type design. We spent days establishing the top of foundation elevation to work with the drainage in these areas. There is a change in grade across this whole area. We wanted these foundations to be close to the same elevation as each other, and there's a lot of thought and regrading and drainage and utilities and so forth to make it work what we thought was best. Certainly on the architectural plans, we can show you for each individual unit where the existing grade is and where the proposed grade is. I'm sure Mr. Chesia can chime in if he wants.
Well, I think more to the point, Don. I mean, I don't think we understood, or I didn't understand that there's significant grade change on the property. So,
well, it's a few feet, but when you're trying to keep it consistent across that grade, Yeah, you may only be a foot higher than existing grade on one side, or 2.5, 3 feet higher in another location on the other side.
It's really hard to see the topo. Can you show that on the plan? Like how the grade goes?
Well, I mean, you can see the dashed
Yeah,
contours.
I can't see the numbers.
You know, this is the high point up here, and it sort of goes downhill in this direction.
And
That's why you can see these grades along this rain garden. There is a cut there in order to make this work, even though these grades are pretty close to each other coming around at the parking spaces.
So are you taking the median grade and flattening it out? Are you going to the high grade?
So we're actually trying to take the median grade. We tried to match the grade here with this rain garden. Okay, that was one factor. This was a factor. This grade was a factor. And then limiting how much we had to cut on this side was another factor. And then we worked our way in, along with the road grades in here to try to make all the rest of the drainage work. As I said, it's days worth of work to establish what we think those grades should be.
And how are they in relation to the single-family lots?
The single-family lots are pretty much at grade. The roads are typically, we try to get the finished road grade itself about 18 to 24 inches below what we think the grade is going to be. So that gives us room to pitch the driveway and have an apron so that the front yard pitches toward the road. But most of the, when you look at each lot individually, they're going to be pretty much flat lots individually.
Well, maybe if you just put some spot grades on, it would be
And/or
helpful.
if you do a cross-section, just so we can visually understand it.
Sure.
And it's not that I think you're doing anything
No, it's
incorrect.
Yeah.
It's just,
it's hard to see.
on the plan, it looks flat.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, we only get them at this size.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
so it's
Well,
really,
we get them online, and then you can blow them up,
You
but
can-
then they're unreadable when
it's
you blow
hard.
them up.
Yeah, it's
No, I'm with
it's
you.
challenging.
with all the other comments that we got, obviously some of those things,
May change.
May change. One thing I did want to clear up though was the fence. The fence is going around on the property line itself. From my experience, you're not gonna have to clear a whole buffer to put the fence in. There will be some, clearing. Obviously, if there's a significant tree, the fence can be moved in somewhat on our property to go around the tree.
Okay, I misunderstood. So I thought the fence was it's going around the perimeter.
It's going around the perimeter of the property, so
Okay.
you will have the buffer within
I got
this
you.
property. And obviously, as you've said, we're not at the point with final landscaping plans, but these were intended to be heavily landscaped. And this was one of the issues we had trying to deal with Mr. Chessie, is not to have to seal the bottom of these rain gardens, similar to Satcham's Path. They're not sealed. We know we have to seal this one because of the well. You have a lot more flexibility when what you can plant in those rain gardens if it's not sealed.
Can I ask you a question? I mean, does it make any sense to, and obviously this would be only if the neighbors were interested, in terms of moving wells at your expense, obviously.
I guess that's
Not
something
yours,
we
Don,
could
but-
consider. I'm not sure what's.
I'm not saying the neighbors would be interested, but if potentially there have been concerns that even though you're meeting the minimum standards, they're still close, so maybe it makes sense to take a look.
We can talk about that.
Just a thought.
Can I just follow up on your gentleman's comments on the native species? I know we don't have a final landscape plan, but in looking at what was provided last time, most of the planning recommendations are non-native, and some of them are invasive species actually, such as the love grass. But I hope you take that into account in the plan as much native, non-invasive species in this plan, considering the sensitive habitat that's in this space. So
We definitely are.
Okay.
And we want to have basically as little lawn as possible. We're going to run all the irrigation off communal wells in there. One thing I just wanted to mention to the chair who earlier mentioned, and this is just for our own guidance as we consider your comments, but you had talked about brick sidewalks, which we had initially included. And then in response to one of the neighbors talking about Surfside is kind of the country, and wouldn't you be better off if you did like a chip sealed type sidewalk and not the granite curbs? This isn't Sconset, no, don't do hedges, do other stuff. So we've actually been trying to be responsive as we go to, and so that's how we got to where we are. We're trying to do more of that type of a sustainable country feel. It's not that I don't want to see it.
But this is.
I live in Sconset. There's no granite curb on my road, but yeah. Again, it's. I guess we can talk about it. It's something we should talk about then. What's that? I know. You can. The notion was to quit at 7:30 because some people are catching the boat. I hope. You super quick.
I just want to know if we're going to see a sewer plan, and I also wanted to know
not yet.
if we're going to see anything from National Grid. No one's mentioned how they feel about hooking up to this many units and where they're going to go and what. I mean, no one. We're talking about water and sewer, but no one's mentioned electrical.
Well, all the electric, telephone, cable TV will all be underground.
But they haven't said if they can meet the demand. And even in the packet today, Mark Willett mentioned he could always reduce demand on the irrigation if it becomes a problem, which he says, given all the new developments coming online, it is a possibility. He says he has the water, but he doesn't have the capacity. So I'm just wondering about electric as well. We're not just talking about Surfside Crossing to some extent. It's affecting everything and within all the other developments that are coming online.
It's a fair question. Ideally, we would get to a final plan, and then you would develop the sewer plan, I would assume, once you know what the flow really is.
Yes, well, that's part of it. The other part is we're still working with the sewer department and their consultant, looking at the gravity and pump options. So we don't have enough information yet. We're waiting on some information from them.
I would just like to say to the public, we're not going to even vote on anything without a sewer plan. So.
Okay, well, we've talked about a lot of things. I mean, there's been no plans of anything. We've seen watercolor. Maybe he could, I'm just saying
There's no point in developing the full-blown plan until the sewer plan, until there is a basic plan in terms of the number of units and whatnot, in my opinion. And Don, the applicant has been talking to the sewer department throughout this process. So it's happening. It's not critical to what's going on right now, unless you're making the point that you don't think the sewer plant can handle the additional flow. But we went over that 4 or 5 meetings ago.
No, but we don't know what plan they're going to do. We know what David Gray said he wanted. I just didn't know if they had determined that. So many things are not determined. I understand, Ed. I'm just asking. The other question I had for you is, you also, and maybe I'm in the dark here, you keep mentioning Myacomet Road. In the Natural Heritage Letter, they actually looked at endangered moths on the Mellow property. Now you all talked about today in traffic. I didn't know there was going to be egress through that property or going out to Myacomet Road.
I don't think that's proposed. I didn't talk about, who talked about Myacomet Road?
Mike Burrs talked about.
He talked about the intersection, but between that and the letter, that Natural Heritage said that they did look at that, I was concerned. So I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, so you guys have to leave, right? When's our next meeting?
December 5th.
December 5th. So we're going to decide then when the next one is?
I think we started here. You can pass this down. We started.
I filled mine out today.
Yes to everything.
In front of me.
Oh.
Do we need to go through this again?
Okay, so that's it. So I think.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
I'll make that motion.